Gene. This place reeks.
I know. Wait, you don't expect me to mop up, do you?
Come on, those guys are cake.
When it comes to video games, difficulty is a pretty important point to consider. Too hard and the game is frustrating. Too easy and it's boring. You have people who think that losing is fun and people who react to a game over screen like dogs to a vacuum cleaner. There's a preference for each person and it's just not possible for a single game to appeal to all of them. Oh sure, we have things like difficulty settings, Iron Man mode and whatnot to adjust the level of challenge, but is that really enough? Well, one possible alternative is Dynamic Difficulty Adjustment, or DDA. The idea being that the game automatically scales the difficulty to each player's skill level. So if you're as good at StarCraft as I am, maybe you won't have to suffer the humiliation of losing to the AI anymore. And if you're a pro, well, I don't know if they could make an AI that would actually give you a challenge. But for now, let's talk about the benefits of difficulty scaling. It offers greater granularity than typical difficulty modes, so that the challenge can be more accurately targeted to each individual. It also frees the player from having to manually adjust the settings. This is mainly useful when playing for the first time, when it's hard to know which level of difficulty is appropriate. Ideally, difficulty scaling makes games fun for everyone, whether you're a total newbie or you're so hardcore your blood is made of Mountain Dew. But as we all know, reality is not so forgiving. A game can't just know the player's skill level. It's a computer program, not Psycho Mantis. Woo! The more the player plays, the more information can be gathered about their skill, and the more accurate the system can become. As a result, the scaling is based on incomplete data. At the start of a new game, there is no information at all. This means any form of DDA is actually less effective early on, which is when it should be the most helpful. After all, if the player rage quits in the first hour, it doesn't matter how great the scaling works for the rest of the game. It's like throwing a newborn into a pen of hungry wolves and expecting it to defend itself until you can determine that maybe it's in over its head. You could try and start off with the lowest difficulty level, but then the majority of players will just get bored very quickly. And if there's one thing that games shouldn't be, it's movies.
Man, fuck David Cage.
But they also shouldn't be boring. Even when the scaling works well, it serves to smooth the challenge, which could make the game less engaging. I'm not trying to say massive gyrations in difficulty are a good thing, but neither is complete uniformity. Highs, lows, and the occasional loop-de-loop can prevent things from getting stale. For example, a large difficulty spike for a powerful boss may add some tension and contrast to help it stand out. Besides, does it really make sense for an enormous creature of unfathomable strength and power to be as easy to kill as a handful of poorly armed grunts? Done right, variance and challenge can be used to enhance the player's experience, but DDA would just get in the way of that. Moving on, some players might enjoy things more if challenge doesn't scale. Imagine somebody who plays games for the storyline alone. I know that's a sick and twisted mental image, but realize that they may want the game to be very easy, even if they are capable of beating it at higher difficulty. A system that adjusts difficulty based on skill alone would leave this person wanting. It would be calibrated to what the designer feels is appropriate for players of that skill level without taking into account individual preferences. Not everyone of the same skill enjoys the same amount of challenge, so taking control of the difficulty away from the player could ruin the experience for some. Another possibility is player-oriented DDA, which allows the player to control difficulty through in-game choices. This already sounds better than passive difficulty scaling since the player gets to pick the challenge level that they want. Flow is probably the best example. It was originally conceived by Genova Chen of That Game Company to demonstrate this very concept. Players control a snake-like microbe that eats other creatures. On each level are two unique creatures that, when eaten, bring the player either back to the previous level or forward to the next. This allows the player to actively adjust the level of challenge. Difficulty is tied to progress, but players may progress at their own pace. However, copying flow won't result in satisfying player-oriented DDA for all games. Just because a suburban mom lost 50 pounds with this one weird trick doesn't mean you will too. Leaving aside the masochists, most people don't want difficulty to stop them from completing a game. So tying difficulty to progress with no outs would just result in more players giving up part way. It could also be tied to other types of in-game choices, but they also have downsides. If the higher difficulty choice runs counter to the goal of the game, the scaling may not even work. Leaving aside masochists once again, most players want to win, and thus they may be opposed to making what they view as an illogical choice just for the sake of challenge. Almost every RPG allows the player to purposefully create an ineffectual build. Some people, like the aforementioned masochists, do so as challenge runs, but it's hard to call that difficulty scaling. It's just an arbitrary limitation imposed by the player on themselves, as opposed to arbitrary limitations imposed by the game, which at least seems somewhat concrete. The key is that DDA choices need to be somewhat important and give the players an in-game reason for picking them. It can be as simple as an unlockable costume, but the idea is that this legitimizes the weaker choice by framing it as a challenge instead. The choice should also be clear about what it does to the difficulty. Using the RPG character build example from earlier, new players might not know that their build is bad, and once they pick it, they're usually stuck with it until the end of the game, so it's not really a form of DDA. The player needs to be able to back out if they're in over their head. In summary, passive difficulty scaling takes control away from the player and has several other issues, preventing it from being useful. Don't believe me? Then at least believe commercial game developers. All of the games using it featured in this video also offer normal difficulty settings. Player-centric difficulty scaling is a little bit different. I'd like to see more of it, if only to see how it works as a major gameplay element. As it stands, however, settings refined and polished through playtesting are still the most important and acceptable form of difficulty adjustment. Thank you very much for watching, and a shout out to Satan is on this for helping me out with this video. Please be sure to let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. I will see you next time.